Shalom, I am Valerie Moody of Covenant Footsteps Ministries. My website is vmoody.com. You can go to the website for resources or to sign up for my weekly teaching. You can send me an email from the website, or you can email me at hi@vmoody.com. Today we are discussing the Torah portion Toledot. Toledot begins in Genesis 25:19 and ends in Genesis 28:9. This parsha identifies the descendants of Yitzhak, or Isaac, the son of Abraham. Now the very first verse stresses the importance of Isaac being Abraham's son. This is important because this is the only Torah portion which deals with Isaac as an independent adult. Yet the real purpose of this parsha is to reveal the sovereignty of the Almighty. Toledot begins with the phrase, "These are the generations of." This phrase leads us to the Messiah. There are fascinating references to Yeshua in Toledot. For instance, Matthew 1:1 begins the book of the genealogy of Yeshua the Messiah. Now, the opening of Matthew precisely parallels the opening of Toledot. The Hebrew Gospel of Matthew actually uses the word Toledot, the title of our parsha, for the word genealogy. But Matthew 1:1 does more than introduce a simple genealogy of Yeshua. It introduces a family history where some of the names are missing. It was a normal practice in ancient genealogical records to omit names in order to prove a point. This is what Matthew does. Matthew built Yeshua's genealogy around the number 14. Matthew 1:17 summarizes in sets of 14. Thus there were 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to the Babylonian exile, and 14 generations from the Babylonian exile to the Messiah. There is a pattern of 14s here. The question is, why is the number 14 repeated 3 times here? The answer to this question may surprise you. 14 is the numeric value of David's name. David's name is spelled Dalet, Vav, Dalet. Now, Dalet has a value of 4 and Vav has a value of 6. So added together, Dalet, Vav, and Dalet total 14. 3 sets of 14 in Yeshua's genealogy communicated a powerful message. Matthew intended to prove that Yeshua was descended from King David. Yeshua was the legitimate son of David, according to prophecy. He was not just a distant descendant of David, but the longed-for Messiah and the future king who would one day sit on David's throne. Yeshua's hidden connection with King David through the number 14 is there in the genealogy of Matthew 1, just waiting to be discovered. It will be helpful to remember the strong connection between this parsha and the Messiah as we go on. Now, Toledot first establishes that Isaac is the son of Abraham. In this way, the Almighty assures us that the bloodline of Abraham is pure for the sake of the covenant. Cynics of that generation tried to claim that Sarah became pregnant by Avimelech, the Philistine king, since he brought her into his harem just a year prior to Isaac's birth. But Toledot confirms that Isaac belongs to Abraham. It is recorded that Isaac's features were so similar to his father's that even scoffers had to admit that he belonged to Abraham. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. Now, after 20 years of marriage, the couple was still childless. In the ancient world, if a wife was childless after 10 years of marriage, the couple, or the husband rather, was required to take a second wife and fulfill the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. But note what Isaac did. Instead of taking his wife's handmaiden, he turned to the Most High for answers. He prayed fervently and pleaded on behalf of his beloved wife, Rebekah. The matriarchs of Israel, Sarah, Rivkah, and Rachel, were all barren at some point in their marriages. Their experiences proved that the emergence of Israel as a nation was something of a miracle. The Almighty had to change the physical laws of nature for them. He modified His creation to allow barrenness to be transformed to fruitfulness. Each new generation was a divine gift in answer to prayer. These mothers who could not give birth naturally brought forth children. Rivkah conceived not just one child, but two. Beset with a difficult pregnancy, she asked Elohim, "Why me?" The Almighty replied with one of the most faithful statements in Scripture. He said, "There are two nations in your womb." From that moment on, the die was cast. This was a sibling rivalry with profound implications. This was two nations in conflict. The world has been locked in a struggle between Esau and Jacob ever since. There are some difficult passages in this Torah portion, but our goal is to learn from the difficulties that are presented here and allow them to impart life and blessing to us. Now, Genesis 25:25 explains the source of Esau's name. Now, the first came forth red all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. The word for hairy is Seir. Esau's name comes from a word play on the word Seir, which means hairy. He was both hairy and red, and found himself continually drawn to the color red. When he came in famished from a hunting trip, he told his brother, "Feed me some of that Adom, that red stuff. The Targum indicates that this was the day Abraham had died, and Jacob was simply preparing a traditional mourner's meal of red lentils. Now that is quite possible, but Esau saw only the color red. He desired the red stew which Jacob was cooking, enough to trade his birthright for it. Now this is critical to realize. Jacob did not steal Esau's birthright. A birthright cannot be stolen. It can only be given. In fact, Esau sold the legacy of generations for the immediate comfort of red food. Despite his hasty trade, Esau was not at risk of starvation. He was a hunter, and he had plenty of food to eat. In fact, it was the prey he killed during regular hunts that earned him the loyalty of his father. Genesis 25:28 explains, "Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rivkah loved Jacob." Notice that the Hebrew word for game is zaid. The word zaid doesn't mean meat, it means prey. Esau was a hunter going into the field to kill living things. He killed as Nimrod killed. Esau had death in his hands, so to speak. He also had an affinity for the color red and settled in Edom, the land whose name means red. The region of Edom is known for its red soil. Now Esau was the grandfather of Amalek, although the precise genealogical connection has been debated. Remember, the Amalekites were the first people who became hostile toward Jacob when he left Egypt in the Exodus. They were the first group to attack the Israelites in the wilderness, just 2 months after the Exodus. It was late spring, the time of year when herdsmen were leaving the lower plains to find pastures for their flocks on the cooler heights. The approach of the Israelites would have appeared as a threat of some type to the pasture lands. The Amalekites swooped upon the ranks of Israel to protect their pastures, but they attacked at the rear, slaughtering the stragglers, the feeble, the faint, and the weary, in Deuteronomy 25:17 and 18. Yet the struggle between Esau and Jacob did not end here. It continued for millennia. Agag, the king of the Amalekites at the time of King Saul, was a sworn enemy of Israel. Then Haman, his infamous descendant, was promoted to the position of prime minister in the Persian Empire. Haman drafted the royal decree calling for the annihilation of all of Jacob's descendants. The ancient enmity between Jacob and Esau reared up right here in this account in the book of Esther, and Haman sought to put every Jew in the Persian Empire to death. Now, the most famous Edomite that was descended from Esau was King Herod. He was known for his cruel treatment of the Hebrew people. In the Brit Hadashah, or New Testament, we read about him repeatedly, and we know from archaeological records in recent years, this century in fact, the archaeologist who had been working at Herodium discovered Herod's tomb, or sepulcher rather, and the reason he could identify it as Herod's sepulcher was that it consisted of red marble, something very rare in Israel. It had to have been imported, but it had been smashed with a hammer into many, many pieces. The Jewish zealots who were holed up at Herodium in the year 73 found his sepulcher and smashed it because of the hatred, the enmity between Esau and Jacob. We even see that in the recent history of King Herod and his burial site. Now, the signature color of the Roman Empire was red, and this was a reflection of Esau. The Roman uniforms and shields were red, leading some Jewish historians to connect the founding of Rome with Esau. We recognize the struggle between Esau and Jacob even in the relationship between Rome and Yeshua's followers. Now, Roman councils outlawed the Sabbath and the feast days. We know this history of the early church, of the early believers. Through religious councils and decrees, they severed believers from their biblical Hebraic roots. As tragic as this was, it was the spirit of Esau attempting to destroy the root of Jacob from which those early believers grew. Now, in the 20th century, in Germany, Hitler envisioned the Third Reich, or the third rising of the Roman Empire. The flag of the Third Reich was red in connection with Rome and with Esau. We see the pattern clearly here. In Hitler's utopia, Jewish people could not exist, and they made Jacob's descendants their prey. So that's our look at Esau. Let's take a closer look at Jacob. Genesis 25:26 states, "Afterward his brother came forth with his hand, holding on to Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them." Now the word for heel is akev. The name Yaakov, or Jacob, comes from the word akev, or heel. It refers to grabbing the heel in an effort to hinder or trap someone. "The trap shall take him by the heel" is the claim of Job 18:9. So that shows us how this word is used in Scripture. This action is associated with Jacob. After introducing Esau and Jacob in Genesis 25, this parsha discusses blessings and wells of water in the very next chapter. Blessings and wells are related, and they influence the story of Isaac. When we discover how blessings and wells are connected with Isaac, we will see why he nearly gave the firstborn blessing to Esau. So let's examine Genesis 26. The Almighty spoke to Isaac in Genesis 26:5, and he promised to bless him because his father Abraham had kept the Torah. Now, Torah is a symbol of living water, or a well of water. Unfortunately, this chapter also tells us that Abraham's wells had been stopped up. They had been filled with earth by the Philistines. Now, the root word of the Hebrew word for well means to make plain, distinct, and clear. This is logical because a good well makes water available in a plain, distinct, and clear manner. That is how a well of water works. The stopped-up wells in Genesis 26, verse 15, meant that the wells were no longer useful as a source of water. The water in the wells was no longer a plain, distinct, and clear source of water. The closed wells were a reflection of Isaac, if you will. Isaac's eyes were stopped up. They grew dim. In Genesis 27:1, Isaac could no longer see in a plain, distinct, and clear manner. In a spiritual sense, he could no longer see the fountain of Torah that his father Abraham enjoyed. Isaac's blindness occurred when the well of water, or the well of Torah, was stopped up in his home. The teachings which had been plain and distinct for Abraham were filled in, causing blindness in Isaac. Isaac's blindness was far more than physical. He was spiritually blind to the nature of Esau's character. He was too blind to see that Jacob was the true heir and the divinely chosen vessel for the traditions and the blessings of Abraham. He was too blind to perceive the will of the Almighty in this issue. Isaac was also unable to see the responsibilities which fall on the firstborn. The firstborn must be willing to lay down his life for others. Today, when an IDF unit surrenders to an enemy, the unit does not send out the lowest ranking soldier. The commanding officer removes his insignia and he goes out to the enemy, potentially to be executed, so that the others have an opportunity to escape and live. This is the calling of the firstborn. Esau enjoyed bringing delicacies from the hunt to his father, but he despised his birthright, meaning that he was unwilling to lay down his life for others or to preserve the Torah. Isaac nearly gave the kingdom to Esau and ultimately to Amalek and the Roman Empire. With Rivka's assistance, Jacob switched places with Esau and received the firstborn blessing. In Genesis 27:28 through 29, Isaac said, "May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you." Now let's think about this for a moment. Does Jacob's deception in posing as Esau before his father actually warrant the blessing? Does his deceit deserve to be blessed? Here is a biblical principle. A blessing is an opportunity to grow into the Almighty's purpose. A blessing is not earned. It comes because of what we're called to do in the kingdom. The very act of blessing is prophetic. One who prays a blessing envisions the future of the person being blessed, and the words become a conduit to the future, so to speak. None of us deserve the blessing, but the Father extends His blessing to us before we deserve it. In bestowing the blessing, the Almighty does not pre-qualify the recipient based on past performance, achievements, or character traits. Rather, He looks on the heart and the future opportunities to use the blessing. A blessing is never just for a single person, not for their benefit alone. The blessing is for the purpose of building the kingdom, and the Most High already knows how each of us as a vessel will contain His blessing and use His blessing. Let's consider an example of this principle. Take Moses, for instance. The Almighty called Moses from a burning bush, intending to bless him with power and leadership. Now, Moses was reluctant. He had done nothing to deserve this blessing. But once he agreed to receive these blessings, his real work for the kingdom began. For the next 40 years, he proved himself to be an emissary of the Most High, and worthy of the trust that God had conferred upon him. In Jacob's case, no, he did not deserve the blessing, but he eventually proved himself to be equal to the blessing he received. Through his actions, through his struggles, through the life that he lived, he proved himself equal to the blessing. We read about him dreaming of a ladder stretching to the heavens. He saw Yeshua standing at the top of the ladder, and how did he react? Jacob reacted by setting up a stone and anointing it and saying, "Behold, this is Beit El, the house of Elohim, the house of God. I was in a holy place and I did not know it." So he responded to receiving the firstborn blessing. Then we find him struggling with the angel. He refuses to give up. He wrestles with the angel through the night. The angel touches his hip and he walks with a limp for the rest of his life. But by not refusing to give up, he is showing himself worthy of the firstborn blessing. He is behaving as a firstborn. We find Jacob proving himself worthy of the blessing over and over and over again. When his sons went to Egypt, or when Joseph was there and Benjamin had also been detained by Joseph in Egypt, his sons came back and they said, "You've got to come to Egypt with us." And he was willing to leave the land of Canaan and go there. In this, he was behaving as a firstborn. So what began as a tale of deceit in Genesis 25 finished strong. It finished by bringing glory to the Almighty. So Jacob proved himself worthy. He never gave up. If we backtrack just a little bit and recall that he worked for his father-in-law Laban, and Laban had changed his wages 10 times, Jacob said he was cold. He was in the field at night. He burned up in the heat, but he never gave up the responsibility with which he was charged. Jacob held on to the firstborn blessing, and he behaved as a firstborn. It's what he was called to do. And in all of this, he showed that the God of Israel was faithful. The God of Jacob was faithful. He was a worthy vessel to receive a change of names. When his name was changed from Jacob to Israel, he walked as a firstborn. He behaved as a firstborn. And in many ways, if we will look at the nation of Israel today, we still see Israel behaving as a firstborn among the nations. Israel has taken the firstborn blessing seriously. They were called to be a light to the nations in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 42:6, and also the verse 49:6 in Isaiah. They are called to be a light to the nations, so that the nations might be provoked to jealousy, so that the nations would look at Israel and learn who the God of Israel is. It was an ancient calling from ancient times because of Jacob receiving the firstborn blessing. And it filtered down through century after century. Generation after generation had to fulfill this calling. They had to fulfill the call of the firstborn. And when it meant laying down their lives, they were willing to do that. Even today, Israeli soldiers run to the battle with no thought for their personal safety. It is almost as if the Almighty has placed His thumbprint on them and imprinted their DNA with the responsibility to hold the land. I learned about a group of 5 young men, less than 25 years of age, who were holding the northern border of Israel in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Everyone else was off duty. They had gone home to celebrate Yom Kippur. They had been fasting both food and water for 25 hours. These young men knew they were going to die when they saw 150 Syrian soldiers coming across the field toward Israel's border. And so what they did when they knew that the soldiers were coming was put down their weapons, they turned around and faced each other, they took hands, and they prayed the Shema, expecting that this was the moment of their death. They were willing to face death because they were behaving as a firstborn. They prayed the Shema, And then they ended their prayer. They picked up their weapons and they turned around again to face the enemy. It was at that point that the Syrian soldiers gasped, took a second look at those 5 young men, and began fleeing from them. Later, some of those Syrian soldiers who were fleeing in that almost battle, almost engagement, were captured. And when they were captured, they were interrogated. They were asked, why did you flee when there were only 5 men in a foxhole in the Golan Heights? And they said, well, didn't you see them? Didn't you see those large white men standing behind them, those angels clad in white? Didn't you see them? And so the point is not that God sent angels to protect Israel at the Yom Kippur War. The point is that they behaved as a firstborn. They were willing to die, and all they had to do was pray the Shema, turn around, pick up their weapons, and prepare to lose their lives on behalf of the nation of Israel. They were willing to do it because the firstborn blessing was on them. Because the firstborn blessing went to Jacob, they could stand on the Golan Heights and hold the land. Now the question is, how do we behave as a firstborn? Do we deserve this blessing? In some ways, none of us deserve a blessing. We have done things that disqualify us for the blessings of the Almighty. And yet, He brings blessings to us. And He does this because He has called us to build His kingdom. If He has blessed us, it's because He knows how we are going to use the blessing. We're a vessel for Him. He shaped us. He fashioned us. And so if we will use the blessing for the kingdom, we will walk in the footsteps of Jacob. We will behave as a firstborn. My prayer is that we all receive His undeserved blessings and that we spend our efforts in building His kingdom, that we have courage and that we're not afraid to turn away from challenges, that we're not afraid to pick up our spiritual weapons, so to speak, and turn around and face an enemy that outnumbers us because we've received the firstborn blessing. I am Valerie Moody of Covenant Footsteps Ministries. I am a firstborn, but besides that, I believe all of us are firstborns in the kingdom. Yeshua is the firstborn from the dead, and we are His followers. All of us have been invested with responsibilities of the firstborn. That's what He desires for us. That's what He envisions for us. And so by His grace, we're able to walk in that. We're able to carry out, to live out the firstborn blessing. It glorifies Him and it builds the kingdom. Thank you for joining me. Shalom.